still. Um, but I'm so happy that you could join us again. It feels like spring out there, even though it's not, but the sun makes it feel very exciting. Margaret Sweatman is here to talk about her novel, The Gunsmith's Daughter, which I am super thrilled to talk about. It was a powerhouse of a novel. It was energetic, and I'm thrilled to hear Margaret read and to chat about it. But before we officially get started, I am going to share a land acknowledgement. Kaylee and I are in Toronto, which for thousands of years has been the traditional land of the Wyandot, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Anishinaabe, including the Chippewas and Mississaugas of the Credit. It is still home to many Indigenous peoples from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work in the community on their territory. And Margaret is joining us from Winnipeg. And of course, I did not look up the land on which you are joining us. Normally I do.
Anishinaabe, the Métis Dene. So yeah, the Anishinaabe is huge.
Yeah. And Kaylee will share information about Indigenous land across Turtle Island. My favorite part of, our second favorite part of the reading is when I get to talk to authors about what they're reading right now. And
great question. Yeah.
And I'm excited for you to talk about what you're currently reading.
Yeah, I mean, I just finished it, and it's one of the, it's a really good book, and I have it on my iPad here, by James Salter, and it's 1979, called Solo Faces. And I'm going to read a paragraph from it, just a very, very short paragraph. The style is amazing, and I thought it was okay to talk about, while we're talking about The Gunsmith's Daughter, because James Salter, 1979, his big hit was A Pastime and a Sport. A Sport and a Pastime, which was supposed to be a big erotic book in the 60s. And so it reads weirdly now, and it is sexist. And I always find these kinds of books interesting because I can live with them and see the representation of women and sexuality for what it is. It's historical, you know. But this Solo Faces is about mountain climbing. And I think, to me, it's about novelists, about writing, because it's a very similar pastime. And, you know, Solo Faces, it's about, Salter writes about extreme solitude, extreme obsession and compulsion, and a lot more courage than a writer ever has to show. But and he's a gorgeous sentence writer. Like, here's a paragraph. A breed of aimless wanderers can be found in California, working as masons' helpers, carpenters, parking cars. They somehow keep a certain dignity. They are surprisingly unashamed. It's one thing to know their faces will become lying, their plain talk stupid, that they will be crushed in the end by those who stayed in school, bought land, practiced law. Still, they have an infuriating power, that of condemned men. They can talk to anybody. They can speak the truth. And that, because he's a gorgeous stylist. And that, to me, is so much about writers, sort of doomed and solitary and somehow surviving over the generations, you know, despite everything.
Right. Yeah. Continuing
implausible.
Yeah.
And unashamed.
Right. Is he Canadian or American? Or okay.
And he was a man's man. He did climb these difficult mountains to research the book, and he lived in France. This partly takes place around the Alps, and so he did inhabit. He was kind of a method actor kind of writer, and so that's another thing I admire about it, that he tried to inhabit his the environment of his novel.
Right.
He has really, therefore, very lived in and surprising analogies and sudden cutaways that create that they augment his reality and create this counterpoint. And
Yeah.
his sentences are very, very simple. He's not a Baroque stylist,
Right.
um, but he does amazing things with structure, uh, prolepsis, and he moves around, and you just have to really watch for it. It's not overt. So
Right.
I love how his style is very naturalized,
Yeah.
simplified. Yeah,
Yeah.
he's elegant.
Do
And he's
you
a sexist.
right? Yeah.
It's always interesting field work.
1979.
79.
Do you find yourself, do you choose authors because of their style, because you've heard about their style, or is that just something that you as a writer inadvertently notice? Or
I seek it out. Yeah, like it's sort of
yeah,
like a diet. You are what you eat.
right.
And right, so reading is very crucial, for writers, as you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
And so if I'm reading something that might hurt me, I have to put it aside.
Right.
Um, yeah, so this one, and I've read this one, I keep going back to this one to tune my ear when I'm starting to write, because there's something of his pitch that is straight. I can hear his tonalities are so pure.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of been messing around doing other stuff. And then when I get a chance to sit down to write, I often put this, lately I've been putting this up just to, it's like hearing an A, it's just,
Right.
yeah. And
Yeah.
man,
I
structurally though, and I like narrative, like you maybe like narrative. You like narrative. Yeah.
well, I love dialogue too, but
Yeah.
I'm, yeah,
Yeah.
a huge fan of going down an imagery an
Yeah.
imagery hole, I think. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I welcome everybody, the handful of people who've joined us since we started. Margaret Sweatman is going to read from The Gunsmith's Daughter, which
Mm.
I'm thrilled to share with you all. But before I do that, Margaret, is it okay if I share your biography?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
I've just kind of pieced
Yeah.
it together from a number of places. Margaret Sweatman is the author of 6 novels, including The Gunsmith's Daughter, which was published by Goose Lane in 2022. Margaret's previous 5 novels are Fox, which was released in a new edition in 2017, Sam and Angie, When Alice Lay Down with Peter, The Players, and Mr. Jones. These books have won the McNally Robinson and the Margaret Lawrence Awards a couple of times, as well as the Rogers Trust Award, the Sunburst Award for Canadian Literature of the Fantastic, and the Carol Shields Award. Margaret is also a playwright whose work has been produced by Prairie Theatre Exchange, Popular Theatre Alliance, and the Guelph Spring Festival. And wait, if you're not impressed yet, Margaret is also a Genie Award-winning musician, having performed and recorded songs and spoken word experiments, vocals and harmonica with Broken Songs Band, the Winnipeg Symphony Orchestra, the Kitchener-Waterloo Symphony Orchestra, and the National Academy Orchestra. So incredible. And that was condensed
Yeah.
for
Well, it's not
everybody
that much.
listening.
I'm old. It took a while.
Thank you again. And if you would share something from The Gunsmith's Daughter.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. This is a chapter, and I think it'll be under 10 minutes, and it's from part 2 of the novel, where they are in Vietnam, and they're at a place called Quang Tri, where there was a really, really terrible battle, really terrible for civilians, a surprise. And it's near the demilitarized zone, so they're right close to the edge of where South and North Vietnam were. And so this is 1972. And you'll meet Bull, who's a great big giant guy, white with peroxide hair, but he has a black accent. He talks like Muhammad Ali. And Cal Welsh is the gunsmith. And Lilac, who's the gunsmith's daughter, and a guy named Larry, who is a photojournalist who was a mentor for Lilac's. Early light. Bull was dressed, swinging his cane while he rushed past Lilac, talking to himself. Those are B-52s, big, ugly, fat fuckers. He went outside. The noise of aircraft screaming overhead. Lilac realized she must have slept. She rolled out of her hammock and went outside to join Bull and her dad and Larry. A formation of 3 B-52s roared west. Over the shrieking aircraft, Bull shouted, "Each one of those mothers got 8 turbojet engines, 70,000 pounds of damage. That's what they carry. That's what they intend to unload out yonder on the hill. See, try and hurt somebody." The aircraft cut the sky. Lilac covered her ears. Another cell of 3 B-52s zoomed overhead. Dawn glinted off the bellies of the planes. Larry walked off with his cameras, saying something no one could hear. "Snake's been sleeping," Bull said. "It's a bad luck sign." He went back inside, loudly complaining, Lilac on his heels. "The NBA been piling up in the hills north and west." With hurried patience, he began to unhook the hammocks, rolling them up, neatly scrolling the mosquito netting. Lilac touched his shoulder, and he jumped and apologized. "We're in the suit now, honey child," he said, "but we're going to look after you real good." He focused on arranging the parachute over his bed, smoothing every wrinkle. Her father walked in and said, "They're heading inland. The action's going to be far away, way the hell inland." Bull stood straight and turned on him. "You think they'd be so stupid? Nobody's going to have another Kaysan. Nobody's that dumb. No way they'd go deep west and get strangulated in NVA country again with no hope of supplies. Tell you what's going to happen." He tugged at his ear with its turquoise stud and gave Cal a questioning, disappointed look. "B-52s are going to bomb the shit out of the hills nearby, try and give the ground troops some wiggle room, flush the NVA out of their tunnels and bunkers, where, I tell you, they've been sleeping for weeks. That means they is all coming down on our heads, which makes this a very perplexing situation to share with you and your family, Cal." "I always protect my family." Bull took a deep breath, trying to calm himself. "In an hour, we're going to hear the helicopter squad slapping overhead. They'll aim to land the ground troops behind the enemy, squeezing from behind, see? So where is that pushing? If all goes correctly, the NVA comes straight into our loving arms." He turned and lifted the film projector off its bench and placed it on the floor, removed the reel-to-reel, removed everything, and cleared a space. He unrolled a map, flattening out on the bench. "We got to be super smart when we make our move." "We're moving?" Lilac asked. "Safer at the coast." Bull's hand like a massive starfish, his thick fingers tracing a path from the airbase northeast to a river, an estuary opening to the sea. "Not a lot of cover, but a deep valley. I got a friend up there, and the Marines are sure to be hanging around that area, being ugly, playing an amphibian trick, a false feint, make the NVA think they're going to come at them by water. We'd have some protection. Maybe we can get Lilac on a lift out of there." "Sure," said Cal. "If you think it's a good idea, we can go to the coast after the field trial." Slowly, Bull repeated, "We get out right now." He leaned to speak closely to Cal. "I can't get her on an airlift from the base today. Nobody's going to want to be in the sky in a shitstorm. We got to make a move on our own cognition. This ain't no place for civilian personnel. I never should have let you come, especially with your little darling." Lilac studied the map. A river draining east toward the ocean, an escape route. Her father said, "Slow down. Tell me why you think it's safer to be on the move now than it is to stay on the base." Bull moved methodically to pull the radio transceiver down from an upper shelf and hand it to Lilac. "Hold that, will you?" She nearly dropped it. It was so heavy. Edgily, he asked Cal, "You want proof?" He pushed the map aside and then retrieved the transceiver from her setting up on the bench. "I'll give you proof." He fooled with the dials till there was static, broad interference. Can't get diddly fuck out of this thing sometimes. Fiddling with the radio till it suddenly blatted Earth, Wind, and Fire funk transmitted from a supply ship off the coast, an R&B tune called Yeah. Then veering up into a whistle, and finally into what Bull was seeking, a hijacked frequency from the mountains where the NVA were holed up, according to Bull, stockpiling captured American 105 millimeter guns, along with Soviet 130 millimeters, 122 millimeter mortars and rockets, and anti-aircraft weapons, planning to attack Quang Tri. As the signal came in more clearly, Lila could hear a voice, Vietnamese, but different from the liquid language she loved. She asked, "Why does it sound so different?" "North," Bull explained. "North got an uglified accent, a harsh tongue, less sensual, less melodic." Lilac was afraid. The voice was utterly confident, implacable, authoritarian. This was the enemy. Lilac looked at Bull. "Do you speak Vietnamese?" "Been here a long time, absorbed some." "Why?" she asked. "Why have you stayed?" He answered her so gently, she knew it wasn't the whole truth. "I just want to see how the story turns out." Cal nodded toward the radio. "What's he going on about?" "Coordinates, numbers. It'll be codified, could be false, fake info." "Fake info," Cal repeated. "Yeah, an info game." Bull's anger toward him relented a little. "Like we used to play." "Well, let's try it," said Cal. "Ain't no game." "It is if you play it. Come on, talk to him." Bull smiled a little. "Won't. No game. You're one crazy dude sometimes." "Ain't a PSYOPs advisor war, Cal. Ain't been for a long time. You know that." Lilac found it painful to see her dad shrink. Bitterly, he said, "I didn't do anything back in the day except draw goddamn useless cartoons of buck-toothed Viet Cong." "You did more than that," said Bull to Lilac. "We made movies, soundtracks, made some crazy shit happen." Then to Cal, "Remember the baby?" Lilac had to ask, "What baby?" "Cal and me, we made tape recordings of a little baby belonged to a girl where we was stationed. That baby never stopped crying. We looped the sound of the baby bawling, see? And we added some wicked reverb, did some subliminal tricks, right, Cal? We got this bass line down real low where you could hardly hear it. Boom da da boom, eerie as all hell. Then we run it through a badass amp and gear it up to 12 so there's distortion. Scariest sound you ever heard." Lilac asked why they do that. "We give the tape and amp to the pilots and they play it loud. I mean, loud, when they fly over the trees where they know the VC is hiding. Then we litter the air with our pamphlets. All we have to say in our letter is, 'We have your baby.'" He laughed. "We have your baby." Cal wrote that part. Cal began to cheer up a little. The North Vietnamese voice went on with its litany of numbers. Over the implacable directives, Bull chanted, "Boom, boom, boom. We have your baby." That's
That was such a great part of the novel. Any scene that Bull was in, I thoroughly enjoyed.
yeah.
But at this point in the novel, Cal's dad has just shown up in Vietnam after she's tried to escape him, tried to
Cal, yes,
get away from him.
yes.
And I want to talk about Lilac because she at one point, Cal shows up and she just kind of goes with the flow, but she also in earlier sections of the novel, she makes spontaneous, determined, self-confident, self-reflective decisions. And she's such a unique character. I love her so much. But I wanted to talk to you about not necessarily the themes of the novel right now, but how she was born into this novel, The Gunsmith's Daughter.
Yeah, yeah. One of the big inspirations was a book that I put it in the back of this novel. It's called War Torn, and it's brief essays by young women who went to Vietnam
Mhm.
During this war, and they were in their early 20s, American and Australian, and and so that really helped me feel that I could inhabit this girl. And she lies, she's 18, but she lies and says she's in her early 20s, as they are. I think, and she like one of the drafts for the novel was in the first person, was in Lilac's voice, but it didn't quite have the uh, uh, a peripheral vision that I needed, you know, and it was too limited. So, but once I kind of found her as a focalizer, as my perspective, I could just go with her, and then have times when she doesn't know what she's doing, and have other people sort of see that she's very lost. And she, yeah, for her, like I wish I had her courage, you know, and as a writer, when I hide, you know, and almost never even go out. And I admire her so much for that. It took me a lot of anxiety even to go to Vietnam to research the book, you know, much less go there during a war. So
Mhm.
she's sort of my hero.
Yeah, she's pretty impressive. And she doesn't that spontaneous thing. She doesn't think a lot about what she's doing or necessarily why she's doing it, but is so open to learning.
Yeah.
I really
Well, I think
is
too, you know,
impressed
there's
by that.
something about angels. Young people are kind of immortal.
Mhm.
When you think maybe of the things you did at that age, it was pretty, you did some crazy things. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because you knew that you were immortal.
Right.
So, yeah.
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 And
And
all of
it's
the
very,
little, sorry.
well, it's just at that period too, it was a time of a wave of feminism. So it was sort of right at your own risk.
Mhm.
You have these periods every now over the centuries where women are suddenly, okay, you want to go to war, you know,
Yeah.
take a
Yeah.
cigarette. Yeah. Yeah.
And the research, I'm always interested when a novel like this requires as much research as going to Vietnam.
Yeah.
I wonder if you still read stuff. There's a new book. I think the author's last name is Becker. I wrote it down somewhere.
The
There's a new book
journalist is
about
from,
three female or women war correspondents.
oh, no. Oh, I
That
like
was put out in 2022. Sorry, I made a
it.
note about it. It
Okay.
was
Okay.
Elizabeth Becker. You
Okay,
don't
great.
belong here,
Okay.
which um, I immediately tried to find in the library because the idea of these really young war correspondents in Vietnam was fascinating to me.
Yeah.
But as a writer, do you find yourself returning to your research, returning to, ideas in the novel and wanting to know more, even though the novel's done, written, published?
Yeah, it's a wonderful question. Not that much.
Yeah.
After this book, this spring, it was published in the spring, and I kept thinking about guns, and I went to a gun range
Oh,
to shoot an assault rifle
mhm.
a few months after it was published, because I still felt that I hadn't kind of finished, and I
Right.
just wanted to know what it was like to shoot this awful little thing. Scared me a lot, and
Mhm.
but then I just sort of sickened of it. I think that kind of finished it for me. Holding it was very frightening. I started to shake, and but I did feel that I needed to touch it.
Mhm.
Um, and then I just got so tired of, for example, of looking at guns and weapons.
Yeah. Yeah.
Still, I think there are certain obsessions, that all writers have, and it's still asymmetrical war and sort of the criminality of money. Um, what it makes people do. So I think there's certain things that I've always been researching. I'm researching a lot about money laundering now.
Right.
So in a way, this one was sort of the corruption of the weapons industry and war, the monetizing of conflict.
Mhm.
And now it's sort of the monetizing of other things, that gets laundered through the drug trade and gun
Right.
trade and human trafficking and all that lovely stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Still
Interesting.
really cheerful.
That yeah, that sounds like the kind of research that you'll finish and go, "Okay, not going
Yeah.
to do that again." Yeah. That it must have been a challenge because there were some scenes in the book where, Cal is I mean, he's so obsessed with this, particular gun that can, shoot a plane out of the sky with a $5 bullet, and so many of those scenes were uncomfortable and enraging in a way.
Mhm.
And yet again, going back to Lilac, she's, I don't know, she's just kind of, this is how it is, right? This is who my dad is. This is what war is. And I am going to be the observer. I'm going to be the writer. Um,
Yes.
without, in that final scene in particular, without strangling him,
Yes.
and trying to shake some sense into him.
Yes.
How
Yeah.
how did you come to that decision as a writer to not politicize the story as much as perhaps a reader like me would want it politicized, with judgments and so forth? It really is a
Yeah.
kind of journalistic
Yeah. Yeah.
story.
There are a couple of issues. One of them is that, and again, this is always in every sort of writing project, this sort of emerges where um, uh, I'm interested in Canada's self-perception as being sort of pure, and and we weren't in the war, right? But we
Right.
were getting rich, and I was a university student at that time, and living with draft dodgers in
Right.
Edmonton, studying theater with very low tuition, and we were selling a lot of nickel, and so Canada's always pretending to be so pure. I mean, we've run right into it now with the Truth and Reconciliation. It's really it's
Mhm.
shattering,
Yeah.
and wonderful. Um, so I was interested in that sort of allegorical quality of it, which makes it a little more remote, and also um, we we sort of we are eating our history. It is in our metabolism, and um, and in everything we do, everything we wear, every aspect is reflective of how we've profited off from suffering. And so I didn't. So she doesn't. I was very, very interested in how she has to accept her culpability and her participation
Mhm.
in life. And so she has to let the bacteria eat her. She also has to acknowledge that she was born of her father. So, and that she cannot not love him because that would make her sicker. So
Right.
it's actually, she has to have the strength and courage to understand that she has to love him.
Mhm.
And when I was writing it, there was a CBC interview with a woman who discovered that her father was a serial killer when she was laden, like she had kids already, but he
Mhm.
had raised them, 5 kids or something like that, I've forgotten,
Yeah.
while he was murdering various people. He was a famous serial killer.
Yeah.
And he took them camping. So that profile of that psychopath helped me a lot with Cal, because she loved her father. She went to see him in prison afterwards.
Mhm.
And so what she had to do was participate in his crime and in his evil, and let herself understand that she participates in evil. And so that's a very, very difficult thing to imagine.
Mhm.
And it was a very exciting exercise in empathy. So,
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, to some extent, she's, I don't want to use the word brainwashed, but because she's homeschooled by him in a very remote location,
yes, yes,
Lilac is almost of him more
yes,
than
yes,
your average kid, right? Like more than a kid who's spending a lot
yeah.
of time with teenagers and
Created dependencies. And my first research was in psyops, psychological operations in war, and in sociology, because he's a sociologist,
yeah.
and teaching, in a way, brainwashing, coercion, and propaganda. And so the book was it was very much more, my first research was really into coercion and propaganda.
Mhm.
Yeah. And so in a way too, he kind of traps Ruby, his wife, too, and then
Yeah.
isolates them. Yeah. So that type of psychopathy is fascinating, and she survives it. She has to survive her father.
Yeah.
Other,
And she ends up inspiring her mom, and which is
yeah,
fantastic. Yeah, I just, before I forget, I loved the scene with Claire, the Canadian nurse, and all, if for anything, if any Canadian readers want to read this book, that section where she talks about Prime Minister Trudeau, Pierre Elliott Trudeau, and as you say, the culpability of Canadians at the time, was a fantastic scene. And then all of the discussions afterwards about that was great. I was moved. We're talking about narrative earlier when you were talking about James Salter. I was really impressed, and I didn't think about it as a reader who's a writer until we got to Vietnam, and there's a scene where she's standing on the shores taking pictures of a couple of people on a boat, and the boat explodes, and in about 5 pages, so much happens, so much imagery explodes onto the page. And then I went back and I started looking at how you structured paragraphs and how you placed imagery in sections of chapters. And I started thinking, again, probably as the student of literature, how is this symbolic of anything? And so I wanted to talk to you about that, because I immediately started thinking about gunfire and explosions and all of that, all of those symbols in how you structured the paragraphs. But I wanted to talk to you about that, your decision to just pack paragraphs with imagery, dialogue, all of it.
I think this book is it kind of scares me sometimes, because to me it feels kind of empty. I think I've been trying to empty out my writing the last couple of books, and so when this one came in the mail, I looked at it, I thought, it's empty. So it doesn't feel packed. That section when she arrives in Vietnam, it was a bit of it would be like a scherzo in music, where I sped it up and added where she meets the president in this sort of unlikely incorporation of some actual interviews with him, because it was so, like, he does say those things. The president of Vietnam did say that, I am a little man and I don't feel well, and so it felt like I was doing kind of a little bit of burlesque in there, to let things, and the man in the white shirt appears. So I wanted things to go staccato for a bit there,
Mm-hmm.
And it was really fun to write before they get into the grueling stuff about actually going to the battle scenes and all that, and the nursing station, and seeing what it was really like. So yeah, I don't know. It's yeah. When I was looking at it again today to prepare for this, I thought, this is a very naked book.
What do you mean by that exactly? When you open it and you think that it's empty, what are you thinking about specifically?
I guess whenever I open a book, I'm looking to read, like, say, James Salter. I was so excited to find Solar Faces, because he was doing a few things at once.
Mm-hmm.
They're on a roof, they're roofing, they fall, and there's ladies going in and out selling pastries at the church bazaar, and so I'm looking for multiplicities, and polyphony of some sort, and I think maybe this book, because when I finally, after many drafts, found Lilac's perspective or focalization, it was mainly her sort of melody that was running through it, and so I think that kind of smoothed it out for me. I think I feel like I should be offering 4 vocalizations and 3 languages, six it up.
No.
The narrative is just so interesting, how you beg the question, how you leave one scene needing the next scene. I mean, I've always been trying to learn how to do that,
Yeah, and it's interesting that you talk about, as a musician, you talk about the kind of melodious structure of narrative, That to me is an entirely 2-hour long conversation, because I would love to know, and Kevin as a musician too, it's like that idea of infusing the other parts of your brain into every piece of art that you try to create.
Yeah, where narrative too is rhythm, right?
Yeah.
You pick it up and then you slow it down, and then you stop and there's silence, and
Yeah, that's fascinating.
you can do a flow chart like that.
Yeah, I don't wanted to, I guess I was reluctant to talk to you about the politics of the subject matter, because I felt like the novel was trying to avoid it. But I loved, there was a moment where Bull calls Cal a holy roller, and that he's kind of discovered Jesus Christ, I guess
Yeah.
at some point. And even Lilac and Ruby are surprised, like, what,
Yeah.
how did this religion suddenly come in?
Yeah.
And because in our current climate, Christian ideology seems to be very much connected to gun culture. Was that a thoughtful decision as a writer to
Yes.
make him this, suddenly
Yes.
sudden holy roller, I
Yes.
guess?
And like, a great accident. The postman accidentally delivered a National Rifle Association magazine to our door, and so the NRA. Then I could see the psychology of the NRA, the Second Amendment and our rights, and God, and Cal's kind of increasingly, I think people do as they age, they become themselves. And so he it's like running a groove, and he gets deeper and deeper into his right wing, and he immense it with Christianity or God. I don't know if it's Christian, it sure is God. And again, yeah, studying the NRA, I researched them a lot, and try to sort of inhabit, like the American Sniper. I got that book.
Right.
It's a
Yeah.
movie, but the book is even scarier, because he wrote it, and so his righteousness, and the warrior righteousness to go inside that skull, that
Oh, wow.
shaved, tanned, grimy skull, is a very scary jungle, and it's fascinating to try and empathize again with that thinking,
Yeah.
the cruelty that comes with that kind of righteousness,
Hmm.
and where God is the monotheistic God, that we're not Christian but monotheistic, and violent,
Yeah.
and white.
Yeah.
The-
And the flippancy of it all, right? Like there's it is what it is, right? And I can't remember what character said it, but there's a line where or it might not even be dialogue, where they say, once this war is over, it's only a matter of time before they create another war, right?
yes,
So
I,
it's
I
not
actually
even that.
found documents from American officials stating that desire
Ugh,
and that belief, and in the weapons industry. And you look at the process. Another thing about the Vietnam War was, I think it sort of was the beginning of the Persian Gulf War, and before that was the Central America. So the gun manufacturers end up with Halliburton, that are running the presidency.
mhm.
Um, so there's a direct line, and a purposeful insistence on violence and
Yeah,
war. Yeah, peace is very bad for
yeah,
industry, steel industry, and
no money in
these
peacetime.
guys were getting so rich, and it wasn't just weapons too. It was making roads and deep sea ports, and so shipping and steel manufacturing and all that is just skyrocketing. They're not going to let that go.
No, God, no. Yeah.
Sorry, it's not very nice. Yeah,
Yeah, it's like
Sunday.
all of it's just, I'm like, yes, I totally agree. You should just don't get Becker's book.
Right.
Just walk away.
Yeah.
If anyone has, I just have a couple of more questions, if that's okay, but I just wanted to invite anyone, if you have any questions for Margaret, please feel free to put them in the chat. You can send them directly to Kaylee and she'll ask on your behalf. I wanted two things. I want to talk about the deflowering. I loved the scene and any discussion about the deflowering, but in the novel there is a kind of sort of love story. I won't call it that, but she very determinedly hands her virginity over to this character Gavin, and then goes to Vietnam to look for him, and they have a well, I won't talk about that, but I loved the I think the urgency of those scenes, but also that much like all of the other scenes, they're full of images, and then it's done, and then we're into another scene. There was no romanticizing
Yeah.
of their relationship. And at one point, Lilac even talks about how she feels like she's removed herself completely from her sexuality and herself, you know, as a desirous woman. How did that come to be? How did you know as a writer you weren't going to spend a lot of time on these scenes? They were just going to happen.
Well, you know, I think again, it was the time, 1972, where I think a certain form of feminism, you saw that I lived this. You don't want to get caught up in the virgin trap, you know, and so you get rid of your virginity and you get out right away to free yourself if you're going to live according to your own needs and ambitions and curiosity. So I think it was a clear decision. Like, she was always an outsider at school, and she saw that romance was very circular. They were going to stay at Manaki and marry the mechanic and raise their kids there, and they were going to, you know, marry their high school sweetheart, and that as being almost death, because it goes in circles. And she wanted to be an arrow, and so she needed a trajectory. And I think too, she's really, really smart, and she saw Gavin, her first lover, boy, that they have this union. She saw his limitations, and she's a bit like she's very well read for an 18-year-old, and she's also read a lot of American journalism, and I think she knows about Kent State. It's already happened. And so she sees, and she knows her father isn't a hero. So she sees him with, I think, a degree of horrified compassion. So she can't really, you know, if you're going to love somebody, they usually think they're bigger than you intellectually, and and so I think she sees him as slightly smaller than she is, and she feels tender. She feels tenderness towards him, but not romantic love. And I think really, yeah, she's quite surgical about
Yeah. And every once in a while, the funniest scenes were when she does it a couple of times in the novel where she romanticizes for, you know, a minute, for a page, you know, what it would be like to marry that guy and have some kids, and, you know, that.
He goes,
yeah, exactly. As a reader at one point, I'm like, no, you don't want that. No, you don't want that. It was good. And again, my favorite kind of novel is the novel where we, as a reader, are left to imagine what happened, and the what ifs of from the section that you read earlier. The imagery of that, we're not given it directly. We have to, it's up to our imaginations to imagine that characters come, characters go, and don't come back. When deciding what to include and what stories to complete, I guess, was that part of your outline, part of how you sat down as a writer and thought, this is going to exist, but it's not going to be told.
I think it's more like it is a bit of staging where you have you have foreground, middle ground, and background, and there are some characters that you and so if you let a background character bloom towards the downstage, you're going to alter your pacing and your
Right.
balance, you know. So there were characters that just needed to be you have to keep them. It's sort of like depth of field or something, or focal point. You need to know how big they are in your perspective, in your depth of field.
Yeah.
It's a lot of fun. And I mean, there are certain characters that sort of eat a drama, eat a book, like Bull, kind of, you know. He just and I didn't find him through research. He came, you know, he just showed up.
Wow. Yeah.
One of those things, where there's he just, and I heard him talk, so I had to make a joke out of how he's talking like a black guy. So I had to acknowledge that, but he kept talking like a black guy. So then, okay, this is really silly, but it was so much fun. And so and then I needed Fan, you know, the very tall Vietnamese officer. He had to conclude at a certain time. It's a lot of, it's like it's fugal, and when you have to silence some instrumentation sometimes and let other things take over. That's one of the hard and really fun things about novel writing, and I think it's one reason it takes so many drafts. Like I had drafts where there was an RCMP officer involved with them, and
Right.
lots of characters in. And Larry was very big for a while, and he had to go back to sort of middle stage. He's a very powerful character for me. I love him, but I had to find his size on my little drama, you know.
Yeah, because if he'd been any bigger, then Lilac wouldn't have been her own savior, right? She would have been her savior.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's
It's
fantastic.
but it is one reason why these things take years to get the balance, and you have to start on page one again. Think, nope, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. Just when you think you're done. No.
Oh, you want to be done. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm finished.
Yeah, that's right. Here it is, everybody.
In this book, I'm finished. Yeah.
Yeah, right. If only that's a dream.
Yeah.
Thank
You're
you so
going
much
through
for
that
answering
now.
my questions. Thanks. Kaylee has a couple of questions from the
Yeah, I kind of interestingly, we have two questions, one from Anna and one from Heather, and they both kind of touch on the same topic. So I'm going to kind of weave them into one. So Anna said, "What is it with Manitoba and brilliant writers? What is the secret of this?" And Heather said, "Are there benefits for a writer to be based in a mid-sized city like Winnipeg as opposed to one of the big three, Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver?" I think that kind of lends well to a discussion on, what is it like to be a writer and creator working in Winnipeg?
That's really interesting. Yeah, like I was living in Vancouver while my kids were babies and toddlers, and then came back to Winnipeg and wrote my first novel, Fox. And I was so glad to be back in Winnipeg, because in Vancouver everyone was looking up. All the literature was about the divine and the sublime, and when I came to Winnipeg, it was about communism. I wrote about this 1919 strike, and I began to work with musicians soon after that, and so it became much more interdisciplinary, because the city runs towards the toilet. It runs down towards itself, whereas the other cities, so often, especially now that it's getting so expensive, you get dispersed out to the suburbs and you can't see anybody. So Winnipeg has a great advantage of interdisciplinary work, and like that's been crucial for me, is working in theater and music, and saved my life, and partly because it relieves the loneliness, and it's so freaking cold, and so you actually are like, it is sort of constant pandemic life here. We've had the pandemic for 70 years. So you are alone, and I was part of more of a writing community, I thought, in the 80s, but I was in my 30s, and everything was sort of more sociable then.
Mhm.
So I think there's a terrible amount of isolation. You know, that's not so good. And I mean, I'm working now with an artist. I'm working on a play with an artist who lives in Toronto and Montreal, and she was just saying yesterday, I'm going to see this dance show with a string quartet in Toronto, and I said, wow, I'm having 3 grandchildren for dinner.
Yeah.
I'd really like to see some art. So it's a toss up. Like Toronto is a great, great city. I've lived there for winters at a time.
Mhm.
And I think just trying to come to terms with your own limitations and your own loneliness and your own failures, and to compromise, to just work it through it. It's just work.
Yeah. Yeah. That's I find the issue with Toronto is there's so much happening
Yeah.
all the time that I feel like I can't decide what to do. And
Yeah.
I think you touched on it earlier, the idea of not wanting to leave the house. I feel like I was born for the pandemic. Like I
Yes.
was made for this
Yes.
time. Yeah. Anna's saying yes to that too. Like I can't leave the house.
Oh,
Perfect.
well.
I'm just gonna stay right here and do
Go
whatever.
inside. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'll dream it. It's okay. I got everything here.
Yeah. So you
Yeah.
touched on a book that you're currently working on, but I wanted to talk to you about your music, and I was hoping that you could share with everybody where they could find your music and if you're still performing. And I came across a couple of YouTube videos of,
Well,
yeah.
it's some of it, the links are some of it on my website, Margaret Sweatman, but also on a website called dreamplay.ca.
Mhm.
And it's an artist hub. There's other musicians there. I'm married to a musician, Glenn Buer, who's a composer and musician. And he created this artist hub called Dreamplay. There are
Oh,
other Dreamplays there, but if you go to dreamplay.ca, and you'll see you enter it, and there's a whole bunch of people there, and I'm one of them, and my music is there, and so is Glenn's music.
mhm.
And yeah, we're working all the time. We're recording, and we just did a show with a small orchestra because Glenn's sort of interested in fusion music
Yeah.
extra, and I started out doing jazz dramas with music and doing spoken word stuff with musicians, and then met Glenn and began to sing and so on, and sing like I am, like just this sort of folky thing, and play harmonica.
Yeah, I was super impressed by that. That was
Well,
fantastic.
harmonica is very easy.
Is it?
Yeah, it is. Yeah,
Yeah.
my grandchildren are very good harmonica players too.
Oh, right. I can't.
I'm
I
getting a
have
bit better. I'm
I have
learning.
no
I'm
musical
learning.
talent, so
I'm learning the beautiful chromatic, which is you actually have to know what you're doing with this. I'm learning it. So yeah, and we wrote a musical, Glenn and I, called Flux, that had some small productions, and we still would like to develop it further.
mhm.
So yeah, music has been always essential, and collaborating with musicians and doing spoken word, hearing the voice and the sort of the grain of the voice is
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah. And especially if, as you mentioned earlier, how it speaks to your writing, like how it helps you
Yeah.
develop a narrative voice.
Yes, and
Yeah.
there's so many analogies to read a score and see, like let's say looking at a fugue, see what happens to the values as they're spoken in different voices, right?
Mhm.
And so
Yeah.
you in a book, in a way, you're looking at every paragraph in a way as a DNA sample of the whole book,
Yeah.
and so that's sort of fugal, and so uh, you're duplicating those themes and those obsessions. Let's say a book is kind of obsessive compulsive. It's a product of obsessive compulsive thinking.
Yeah.
It's reproducing some of the anxieties or images or conceits over and over in various signatures. Yeah. So yeah, the analogies are they just sort of let you out of your traps, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
more fun. The musicians
Yeah.
are very fun, you know.
Yeah. I love music. If I could string notes together, I would 100% have been a musician. Thank you so much, Margaret, for joining
Thank
us
you.
and for talking to us.
So
We've got 2 copies of The Gunsmith's Daughter from Goose Lane. We are going to raffle off one now, and I'll set something up once I get the video up on YouTube. I'll set something up so that anybody can like and share and retweet, and we'll raffle off another copy on social media. But for now, Kaylee is going to pick a winner.
My little can of worms. Our winner for this evening is Heather Wood.
Yeah! I'm so excited. That's awesome. Heather, congratulations.
My
That's
email's
awesome.
there. If you ever want to get hold of me, my email's on my website.
Yeah, and that's margaretsweatman.ca. I think Kaylee put it in the
Yeah.
the chat, or
And if you
.com,
make a
sorry.
complaint, let me know.
The
Yeah.
chat at just a few more up. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, Heather, just send me your mailing address. I might have it, but
I'll
send
send
it.
it to you anyway.
Great. Yeah. Thank
Okay.
you.
All right.
Margaret, thank you again for joining us. I really appreciate it. And thank you to everybody for coming. Thank you to Kaylee, as always, for the fantastic work.
Yes.
We're going to be back on March 26th with Dale Furlong. She's going to share her collection of short stories, The Lake Effect. And Kaylee's shared all of our socials on there where you can follow us, and there'll be more details about Margaret and links to where you can purchase a copy of The Gunsmith's Daughter. And you can share that with friends.
Thank you
Thank you.
so much. It's a great honor. Okay.
Great.
Yeah.
Thanks. Have a good night, everybody. Thank you, everybody, for joining. Take care.